Welcome back to Profit Fundamentals. Mr. Adi Godrej is with us now for a sense of what industry is looking at from the budget. Mr. Godrej, good morning. I'm sorry to have kept you waiting, sir. I just want to start with the big picture from the industry. It was heartening to note that the industry is taking note of the fiscal challenges and not demanding any sort of concession on the tax side. But I guess the best thing in any case you can do in the current environment is to keep most tax rates steady to avoid any uncertainty.
Yeah, in fact, we have also suggested to government where they could raise taxes which would be beneficial to the economy. For example, currently the import duty on vegetable oils, especially crude palm oil, is zero. We have suggested to the government they should raise it to 10%, because that won't increase any costs in India, because the international prices will come down to that extent. India is a major player in this field. So we have even made suggestions for increase in taxes. But what is the most important thing that needs to be done is that we should not have any taxes, any measures or any announcements that create a negative perception or a negative sentiment, because the economic sentiment is just about recovering, the economy is recovering, and we shouldn't do anything to set this backwards.
Mr. Godrej, I mean, that takes me back a year, when the last budget came in, all of these uncertainties around GAR, retrospective taxation, etc. came through. Is the industry now satisfied, are, issues that are in the past, and going into this budget, then, other issues like, say, inheritance tax, which has been talked about, taxing the super rich, etc. All of these ideas doing the rounds, would you suggest and, advise that we stay away from that?
Yes, absolutely, because it would create a tremendously negative sentiment. For example, take inheritance tax. It is not a tax which is prevalent in developing countries. It's only a tax in developed countries. They are looking to increase their growth rate from 1 or 2% by a percentage point. Whereas we are trying to get our growth rate up from 5 to 6% to 8 to 9%. And any inheritance tax or any additional taxation on incomes would lead to a very negative sentiment and perception that would throw back our plans for economic growth.
Point taken, Mr. Godrej. I guess, the only reason these suggestions are doing the rounds is because of the kind of fiscal pressures the government is facing. What was the conversation? What is the industry suggestion in terms of reducing the expenditure if you can't actually raise revenues very dramatically? Are you basically going up and, sort of supporting the Kelkar recommendations? Are there other suggestions that are coming through from the industry end, sir?
Well, we have suggested that the Kelkar recommendations should be put into practice as early as possible. We have suggested the goods and services tax should be brought in as early as possible. This is the single most important reform for growth. It will add 1.5 to 2 percentage points to India's growth rates, other things being equal. So these are the ways to create more revenue. If there is GDP growth, revenue increases will be tremendous. Whereas if you bring in negative measures, negative perceptions, in fact GDP growth might go down and tax collections would go down. It's not high rates of taxes that get higher collections, it's good growth that creates for higher collections. Whenever India has had high rates of taxes, our economy has suffered. Whenever we have had reasonable rates of taxes, we have prospered. And I think that formula should be followed.
What was the message from the industry, Mr. Godrej, on social spending? There's a lot of talk about the fact that this is a pre-election budget and there would be, the social sector which would be in focus in some ways or the other. What's the industry's message, the balance you need to strike on supporting the social sector, yet keeping other pressures in mind, sir?
We think some of the expenditures in the social sector, especially in the rural sector, have yielded benefits. So, for example, what happens is when things like NREGA come into place, rural incomes rise, rural consumption rises, which leads to higher production and higher revenues. So some of these are very worthwhile expenditures, whereas there may be others which might be misplaced. So we are very clear that subsidies should be reduced, especially on items like diesel and fertilizer. And we have also suggested that the use of the Aadhaar scheme would add tremendous value.
Right. Mr. Godrej, a couple of specific issues which are there in the CII memorandum. One was on this accelerated depreciation, sir. Is that largely with a view of trying to encourage investments to an extent, whatever extent a measure like that can?
Yes, we have suggested that there is a problem in terms of lack of adequate investment, And if for a short period of time, 2-3 years perhaps, if we have an accelerated depreciation, businesses would look to prepone investments, and that would be very useful.
Probably, sir, from a pushing investment standpoint, it's only these measures which can come in as part of budget measures. The bigger picture, of course, remains CCI, clearances, etc. What did you pick up from the finance minister on this push towards investments and reviving investments, sir?
Well, industry welcomed the formation of the CCI. We mentioned to the finance minister and the officials who were present that only part of the problem was lack of investment. The other problem was clearances. Government clearances have been unduly delayed, and besides the CCI, which of course will look at the larger projects, we need to see that smaller projects, medium-sized projects are also cleared rapidly. And in fact, for the CCI, we welcome the formation of the CCI, but we emphasize that early execution in the CCI will be very important. If in the next month or so, several of these large projects which have been stuck, which have been held up, are cleared, I think it will create a very positive perception.
Mr. Godrej, just a last question. I didn't see this in the memorandum. I'm just curious to know what your take on gold import duty is, sir. There's talk about gold import duty being raised to 6% in the context of the macros. I'm wondering if industry has a view at all on it. If you have a view, sir.
No, we don't have a view on that, but we do feel that the very high level of gold imports in the last financial year, about $60 billion, clearly has affected our balance of trade. And something needs to be done to contain it. At the same time, it shouldn't be done in a way where gold smuggling becomes a big thing again.
No, that's true, and that's the concern there. Mr. Godrej, thank you so much for stopping by, sir. And again, apologies for any inconvenience to you. Thanks for your thoughts.
Good
that's
the
CII, the industry agenda ahead of the budget. Let's see what of it comes through, which we'll only know in the budget. Let me get back into more immediate concerns, and that's the earnings picture.